Good morning. Guess we're all kind of waking everybody up. Woke me up. I love that little boom, clears your head, you know. I was afraid there for a little while this morning that nobody was going to show up because we've been stuck on the same passage for so long. And everybody said, we know it. We don't need to go anymore. We got it memorized. We are still stuck in 2 Kings 4. I'm sorry. It's interesting as I've continued to try to ferret out new things to read, to try to find other perspectives on it, that a lot of commentators and scholars have a real struggle with Kings in general, but with this passage, this group of passages in particular. And one of the reasons for that is because the Kings, by and large, is a following through of the kings, the leadership of the nation, and it follows their ups and downs somewhat briefly, but yet it follows them through. And then in the middle of this series of studies of these kings, all of a sudden you have these stories of the prophet Elisha stuffed in there. And it's just kind of injected into the middle of that, and some of them argue that it doesn't really fit, that logically it belongs somewhere else. And then the thing that really throws them is that whereas we've been studying kind of the national history, if you will, and how things are coming and going for the kings and the nation at large, all of a sudden you're focused in on this handful of seemingly insignificant events, like the widow's oil, that seem to have very little to do with the national comings and goings of Israel. And so why would the person that's collecting these writings, or that's doing this writing about the kings of Israel and Judah, suddenly get so distracted on the minutiae of what happens in the lives of a handful of people? And while the story we're looking at with the Shunammite, maybe you can say, oh wow, this was a major miracle. I mean, we're going to have a resurrection here, and it's really important to look at this amazing miracle. In the next one, it's a pot of stew, and after that, it's feeding a few people some bread. And you go, so why did the writer do that? And people are really perplexed by why those things are in here, and so makes it easier to pass over. Yeah.
I think it's a picture of God too. He has his soul, he's running the universe and over the kingdoms, but he still cares about what's happening.
So you got individuals involved, yeah.
And I think it was David Jeremiah just this week. I'm not sure which one it was. He said that all these little, he's talking about the same thing you're talking about. All these little stories, there's an application in there for us somewhere.
Right.
And God's trying to tell us something. And I thought, well, sorry, I could look for this. What's God trying to
Okay, what's he telling us? Yeah. Yeah, it was really interesting. I was talking to Adam last week after his message, and we were talking about the challenge you have, especially in the Old Testament, and that he wrestled with his passage he was teaching on last time, because it refers to the Old Testament things and what do you learn from it, and how do you look at them, and that problem of when you look at this passage, there's two different ways to look at it. One is that it's written and was recorded at a time that this was used way back when, hundreds, thousands of years ago, for the nation of Israel to read and know and be recorded. And so you say there was a message, there was something here for them at that time that you need to look at. And then the other side of that is, well, now that it's written and we know the story and we're beyond anything that it would portray of Christ and those kinds of things that the Old Testament looked forward to him. Now that we're on this other end, we look back at it and we can see where we've been, and we can see those things that pointed forward that they couldn't see. And they just looked at him and go, huh? And if you'll remember on the road to Emmaus, that was the very issue, that Christ appears to these guys and they're walking along and they're telling him all these things that have happened, and they're so puzzled and they don't understand. Here we thought this guy was going to be the king. He was going to lead our nation out of captivity to Rome. We're going to be independent, and it's going to establish the kingdom. It's going to be so great. And now he's been killed, and we don't get it. And it tells them how he took them back, and he went all the way back to the beginning and led them in a discussion through the Old Testament scriptures and showed how it was pointing to these very events. And they all went, wow! We didn't see it. And so that's kind of the tug of war we're in, is that to try to look at this from the Old Testament side and say, what did these people learn? Why was it there for them? And then to look at it from our side, looking back and say, is there something we can see in this, that God's had clues for things for the future that we can see in there? And then, of course, are there principles that we can apply out of all that, the so what for daily life here? So that's what makes this passage so challenging to go through, is because it's this oddball story with a fabulous miracle that is really frustrating because there's so many details left out and unanswered questions. So we're going to try to wrestle through and leave you with a bunch more questions. I haven't finished giving you all my questions yet. And if you'll remember, those who were here last time, this is my list of questions, and that's my list of answers. So, just so I'm clear. So, last time we looked at Gehazi and the prophet Elisha and their roles in this. Today I want to look at two other aspects of it if we can. I want to look first of all at the nation of Israel and how this maybe fits into what's going on in Israel and the history of Israel, and maybe a little glimpse into why this is included for them. And then I want to look at the Shunammite. And it is Mother's Day, and it's appropriate that we take a hard look at the Shunammite, who was an amazing mother as well as woman of faith. So we'll try to squeeze that all in. Got 30 minutes to do it. I'm going to have to put the foot in the throttle, aren't I? So here we are. First thing we want to do is we want to look at the nation of Israel and how this fits into that context of what's going on. And we know right now, at the time this happens, Israel's kind of in a mess. The northern kingdoms, of course, are the nation of Israel. The 10 tribes have separated from Judah. And Judah, we've kind of left them in the dust. They are down south, and our focus and attention is off of them a little bit at this point. And we're really looking at the northern tribes. They've left the worship at the temple because they've separated themselves physically from Judah, so they're away from Jerusalem. They set up the golden calf worship as a substitute. And they've also brought in the worship of Baal and a lot of other stuff along with that. But they've had all those priests and everybody pushing all that junk on them as well. So all that kind of stuff's been going on, and the tide has kind of been up and down with each one of those things. But pretty consistently, the worship of the golden calves has been there, which was almost like Judaism, but not quite. So it was real close, but they had substitutions in there to make it convenient for everyone. So that was their excuse, and that has carried them through. The nation has been financially successful up to now. At the time we're at here, you're going to begin to see the financial situation start to crumble. And the other thing you've got to understand about kings is that the writings of the kings, just by themselves, are a goofy, brief, frustratingly brief history. But you cannot take them, and I told you the struggle I'm going to have with this as we move along. They are the backdrop for all the prophets. So all the Isaiah, Jeremiah, all the way through to the end of the Old Testament, all the minor prophets, all those guys wrote, beginning with Joel, which is going to start here in just a few years. We're going to pick up the time when Joel was writing. And all of those things were written and prepared for us against the backdrop of Kings. So you kind of have to know what's going on in the nation when you read those prophecies and things, or a lot of it will make no sense. And this doesn't make sense without that. It really helps you see what's going on. And the first thing you have to realize as we come to this thing is that the nation of Israel has totally forgotten how they got started. And if you look at them, their focus is now on having a king and who we are, and that will take you back to the very place we started this study in 1 Samuel. Because you will remember that they were really frustrated with the way things were going. Things were fine when Samuel was their judge, and then Samuel turned it over to his kids, and his kids didn't do such a good job. In about chapter 8 of 1 Samuel, you find out that people came to him and said, "You know, we liked you fine, Samuel, but your kids are a wreck. They're taking bribes, they're not doing the job right. Now what we want you to do is give us something. We want a king," and there's a reason we want a king. One, we don't like your kids, but the big reason we really want a king is we want to be like all the other nations. And if you remember that desire they had, that is exactly what they got. They now have a king, and they're just like all the other nations. And they've gotten this idea that the reason that God would bless them somehow, or that things are important, is because they are Israel. Because we're Jews, because we're this people, somehow we're special, and that's what the deal is. It's all about us. And they have forgotten to go further back in their Old Testament into Genesis, and it all started in Genesis chapter 12, and it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, you go forth from your country, and from your relatives, and from your father's house, into the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and one who curses you I will curse. And you and all the families on the earth shall be blessed." That's where it all started. And that promise is based on what? On how good they are, on the fact that they're this nation of Israel, and they're important, and they're this really, so God has to take care of them because they're really important, right?
It's based on God, what He wants.
It's based on God saying, "Abram, I picked you out, you go. And this is what I'm going to do for you." And that's what they forgot. It's based on Him, it's not about them. And they've got their eyes on themselves and their king and their desire to have a king and their desire to be a great nation. They're going to be these cool bunch of guys, and we're going to be this great, powerful Wizard of Oz. No, the great, powerful nation of Israel. You know, that's what their focus is on, and that's when you come to this story. The whole nation is about figuring out how they're going to keep those guys at bay over there and these enemies at bay over here, and keep out all this trouble here, and figure out how to handle the drought, and how we're going to handle this and handle that, and keep our country going. Because we're great and we're Israel. And my gosh, we have to be blessed.
God said those very things that happened to them.
Yeah. He said, "You turn your back on me, the source of everything, and down the tubes you go." The other thing that we'll see, and you really see it in the book of Jonah if you go there, is that they missed the part where it says, "In you, everyone, all nations will be blessed." The whole reason that Jonah got sent to Nineveh is because Israel was us four and no more. Just us. We're not reaching out, those crummy people, and even the prophet himself. "I'm not going there, because if I go there, you'll bless them and they'll get saved, and I hate their guts." That's my brief, concise commentary on the book of Jonah. Yeah. So you got this people that are really turned inward on themselves. They've forgotten their God. They've forgotten the source of blessing, and they've forgotten the purpose. You know, and even Judah is going to be, you'll see them struggling, and the only reason Judah exists as long as it does is God said, "Because I made a promise to Abraham, I made a promise to David, and therefore there will be a man on the throne because I said so, and I will do what I said I'm going to do." They've forgotten all that. But you see, I think in the story, you mentioned that while all this stuff's going on, God's looking at the individual. always, always, always works through the heart of the willing individual. It's not through this great mass of a nation. Yes, the nation's important to him, but he wants a nation of people with hearts that are fully his. And so he's looking out and he's finding in the midst of all this chaos, here is this woman, this Shunammite, whose heart is fully his. And it's like a commentary to the nation of Israel as they look at this. God's saying, I know you think it's important. They loved the one before because the story before these women, the widow's oil, the one before that's the great victory in the battle against Moab. Oh man, we love that. But now all of a sudden he says all these next stories are all about individuals. And the last one is about a foreigner, which is all about what they're supposed to be doing. Looking out, being a blessing to others. And it's funny, how many thousand years later Christ brings that very illustration up to them to say, you're not looking out. It's not about you guys. God went and healed the leper from out there. So the nation's looking out and God's saying, it's about your heart. Here's this woman. I'm going to bring, of all people, a woman, 2 in a row now. I'm going to bring up and say, you need to look at the individual. It's about the heart. Will you listen to me? Will you trust me? Will you come to me? Will you have your eyes focused on me? And will you do what I say? Will you be obedient? That was the woman with the oil. So we really got a story to the nation here to look at what it's really all about. The other really interesting thing, I think it applies as a lesson to them. Do you remember his first solution for the cure for the dead child was to tell his servant to do something? Run ahead. Now we go read through this, but I'm short on time, so you got to go back and reread it quick if you didn't catch it. When she finds out that this woman's son is dead, he says, Gehazi, grab my staff, you run, and you put it on that boy's face. And we've wrestled with that. Everybody I've read struggles with that, and I'm not sure I can say, here's the answer. But as you look at from the nation, and we talked about how that staff represents the law. It represents that power that God used through that prophet. And then, like Moses and the law, and his staff and all that sort of thing, the rod that budded and all these things really tend to represent that part of his authority. And what it tells you is the law doesn't bring life. What was the law designed to do? It tells us in Hebrew. The law, it says, could never save anybody. What the law did was reveal that you're dead. And did it work? Well, in this story it did, because Gehazi ran down there, he laid it on the boy's face, and he watched. And in verse 31 it says, he laid the staff on the lad's face, there was neither sound nor response. So he returned to meet him and said, he's dead. He didn't wake up. Well, that's exactly what the law was supposed to do. These folks were using it like okay, I do the checklist and I follow through that, then I can do the rest of the stuff and it doesn't matter. I just kind of pack this thing around. We'll go through the formalities to the point where one of the condemnations of the nation is, who demanded this stomping in my courts? I don't need that. What is it I wanted? I want the heart. So there's a real heads up. If they saw, and we're not sure they did, but if they saw in that staff a representation of the religious system and the law, it points out the fact that he's dead, but it doesn't bring life. And then the interesting thing is, what did bring life? It was the physical presence of the prophet as he represents God. It's that face-to-face, if you will, that close relationship. It's a people thing. It's that bond. It's the prophet talking, passing the message on to his people. It's God coming and being in close contact with his people through folks like us that brings the life. Through the prayer of the prophet and that close contact. Now when we look at on their side, we say, oh, it's the heart, it's the individual, it's God's person being close to God's people that somehow has this happen. As we look back, what you can see, looking the other way at it and looking for, well, what does that tell us about the future? And it says, well, the law pointed out the death, but what brought life was when God came close to man and was face to face and eye to eye, mouth to mouth, hand to hand with man. And I think it's an illustration of the God-man. That's what brought life. And as you look back, it's like this little hint. Again, it's when you can look from our perspective, knowing about Christ, knowing about the cross, you can look back and he says, he's pointing to it even in that the resurrection and then life that you get out of that's pointed that way. So I think there's some hints there for us as them and some real wake-up calls for the people that y'all are headed the wrong way, and here is the woman in a situation that's illustrating where I need you or where you need me. And it's like it goes right over their heads. Because it's about to get really difficult for them. If you go read Joel, which is coming up just a few years away. We've got a drought in our next little story, but when you read Joel, you find out about a drought. It was written in the context of a disaster, environmentally. So much for the nation of Israel so far. It's like they're just totally dead. They need that supernatural rebirth that this boy gets, and they don't seem, I don't know, it doesn't seem like they're able to pick that up. But then we got the Shunammite, Mother of the Year. And I wanted to go through some things and remind you about her that we see from the very beginning all the way through. And the first thing is, she's obviously a believer. She's obviously already tuned in and spending time with the prophet, because it refers to her husband asked her, it's not a special day, why are you going to the prophet? If it was a special day, I'd expect you to be there. So she was already attending class with the prophet, was hearing the word, and it obviously made a dent, and it caused something in her heart that says, I'm going to extend hospitality to this guy. And then as she does that, you see her with a perception, and her husband apparently somewhat, there's never a disagreement by her husband, you don't see his active involvement in things, where she recognized that this is more than just a good teacher. This guy's somebody special, and she calls him a man of God. And starts to show you that the time she spent in study, the time she spent listening to this fellow has helped her have a faith that's different than maybe most of the folks around her. And it really comes through in a couple of ways. One is the first one, that anybody notice as she's taking care of this man of God and opens her home to him, creates a special room for him to stay in, and he's coming and going, and she's probably beginning to hear the stories of Elijah and the other things, the experiences that he's had and the things that they might share in a conversation. She's probably heard of Elijah raising the widow's son and all those sort of things. And when he comes and says, how can I reward you and thank you for all that you've done? And she goes, I live among my people. In other words, I'm fine. Everything's okay. I'm contented with where I'm at. And that sounds fine right there. You go, oh wow, isn't that neat? And then you find out what Gehazi notices, which we didn't see before. And now you back up and you say, a Jewish woman in the context of that culture who is barren means what to the Jewish people? It's a curse from God. That's how they looked at it. And she says, I know all my neighbors think that I'm cursed because I don't have any children, we're barren, that somehow I've sinned and terrible person, but when this man of God says, what can I do for you? She goes, everything's fine, I'm good. God's taking good care of me, I'm happy. Isn't that something? That's amazing faith. When she says, everybody else says I'm cursed, but my faith says that has nothing to do with God's cursing or blessing. It's just the way God has chosen for my life to be. And I'm happy, and I will accept the way and the place that God's given me. That is incredible faith right there. And of course, then we know that that is honored by God with this great blessing of a child in a time in their life when their husband's too old and they shouldn't have children, and they have a son as a super answer to prayer, and she's got to be just over the top excited. I mean, I just can't even imagine. In our culture, to have a child when you thought you couldn't have one is a big deal and big excitement. In that culture, in that situation, I can't even imagine what a big deal that is. 5 years later, that child's sitting on your lap, dying in your arms. Where are you? Where's your heart? Where's your head? God, why'd you do this to me? No. And yet I don't see that in her. I see a question as to, didn't I ask you not to cause this? But what you see in her actions, what does she do? What do you see her do? Takes the child up and puts it on the bed of the prophet. Why would you do that?
That's where she got him.
That's where she got him. Okay. It came from the source was the news, came from the prophet, the promise. Why would you put him there? I mean, you've lost the child. There are arrangements for dead people. In fact, to be on contact with the dead is uncleanness right there. So ceremonially, she's unclean when that child dies. And now you put the unclean child in the bed of the prophet, you've just made his room unclean. I mean, you don't even, that's not part of our thinking, so it's hard to get your mind around. Why would you do that? Maybe help shed a little bit of light on what confidence she had that there was something God could do about this hopeless situation. I don't know if I have that kind of faith that can look at something and go, God can take care of this if he wishes. God can do something about it, and this prophet has the channel. He's the channel that can happen. And then you go to your husband. You have just lost your miracle child. And you say, I need a donkey. I need to borrow the pickup to run to town. And he goes, it's not Sunday. And her answer is, I know, but we've lost our child and I've got to go to the prophet. No, you don't see that, do you? She says, Shalom. One word. Peace. It's okay. It's okay? I mean, what kind of faith is this? It's the kind that Jesus himself says, my gosh, I haven't seen faith like this among people. That's incredible. And she gets on this thing and goes 15, 16 miles to the prophet. And Gehazi comes running now. How is everybody? Is everybody okay? Why are you here? And the answer is, not somewhat to put him off, probably. But her answer is, Shalom. Everything's fine. And then she gets to the prophet and you find out that everything's not fine. What do we learn from that? Well, she finally crumbled. Once she got there, yeah, I knew she was going to do that. She was just going to melt into tears. She just had to get around the right guy. Why, when she gets to the prophet, does she fall on her face and grab him by the feet? Why there, and why is that not condemned? Gehazi was going to condemn it, kick her out. That's not even appropriate. He says, no. We leave it right there. Why is that okay? Who is he? Just a man.
He's a man of God.
He's the man of God is the key thing. Then she describes him that way herself. That's the throne of grace, if you will, of her day. That's the place where it's appropriate to take those crises and disasters of life, is to go to the throne of grace and pour out your heart. And you notice what she said. Didn't I ask you not to lead me astray? Or she didn't say the child's dead, it's all your fault. She didn't say, how could you do this to me? She just said, didn't I ask you not to get my hopes up inappropriately? That's all her concern, or if there's a complaint at all out of her, it said, I asked not to have this, my hopes get dashed, get my hopes up and then have them dashed. Though I just heard a story this morning on the news of another mom. I don't know if anybody watches the CBS morning thing. I do while I'm fixing breakfast just to have something going. And it was about moms. And there's a woman who adopted a child, a little girl from Africa, that found out at the last minute that she had this terrible heart condition. Says, do you still want her? She said, yes. She's our baby. We want her. She had her for 33 days in the hospital. She had a terribly deformed heart. And she lasted 33 days. And she said, they asked her, they said, if you knew that you were only going to have her for 33 days, would you have done that? She said, my daughter, of course. We'd taken her for 33 days. Wow. I'm sure this woman would have taken her for 5 years, or taken this son for 5 years, and yet she's there at his feet. And we're out of time. Quick. We're close. But I want you to just think through the faith of this woman. Gehazi is sent, and she says whatever. I know where the source is. You catch it? The nation was leaning on who they were, on these outward things, on the fact that they were Jews, on the law, on the prophet. No, we're the chosen people. They're leaning on that. She says, I will not leave you, Elisha. It's just the same thing Elisha had sent to Elijah, said to him before when he knew he was going away. He said, I'm not leaving you. You are the source. I am. You're the one here to see. And they head back down to the house. What kind of faith expects that kind of result? I mean, do we really go today, do we go to God with the catastrophes and the disasters and the stresses in our lives, and do we really expect God to do this kind of, do we believe that He's capable of doing this kind of thing, and do we believe that He might even possibly be willing?
I read, there's just this one line the other day, and it said, paraphrasing it a little bit, true faith is not believing that God can, but that God will. And I think that kind of applies to this. Yeah. I mean, we don't know what His will is, but we do know that His will be carried out. So He will do.
He will do.
Promises. He's made promises, and those promises will be kept.
His promises will be kept, and His character never changes. And do we trust Him enough to even ask it? And are willing to accept if He says, that's not part of the plan? And then when we go, well, I knew that was what He's going to say. Because that's what you did when you were a little kid. You went to mom or dad and you said, I really want this, and everybody else has one, and I need this latest thing. And they go, they've always told you, you got to come and ask, and we'll discuss it. And so, and then they say, no, I'm sorry, you can't have it. Say, I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah. Or you start out the conversation with, I know you're going to say no, but.
Yeah, there you go. See, that's how you do it. And so, do we go to God that way?
Yeah.
I know, God, you're going to say no, but I'm supposed to ask, so here it is. There's faith. Yeah. Now, this woman is just amazing in the light of the whole nation of largely people that are going about their business, their everyday stuff, they're doing what they do. They're just like us. Yeah, it's a different culture and different time. They're no more religious or less so, I think, than we are today. The idols they worshipped are different. They had a different system going on there than what we have today. But the principle of what was happening is the same. They were marrying and giving in marriage, and they're making a living, and they're doing all this stuff, and they're all focused on that. And in the midst of that, with the gathering storm way up north of the nation getting ready to come in and pack them off in a few years, with all that hovering up there and everybody oblivious to what's about to happen, and God warning and warning and warning through His prophets. Here is an example of one. I'm sure there were more, but this one example that God picks out, and He sticks her up there and says, here's what I'm looking for. Here's faith. Here is someone that trusts me with life itself, that trusts me with eternal things as well. That's just an amazing illustration for them, and for us as God saying, that's what I'm looking for in you. So I'm just overwhelmingly impressed with the Shunammite. And mind-boggled at of what she was expecting. And to be able to sit and talk to her and say, when you got on that donkey and took out, what were you expecting when you got there? What were you thinking? Tell me how you made up in your heart and your mind that that was the right thing to do. Not to tell your husband, not to tell anybody else, just to go, and you knew that somehow it was going to be shalom. How did you know that? That's incredible faith. I'd like to have that kind of faith. I hope I haven't bored you too terribly with this whole passage. I hope I've raised a whole ton of questions that I can't answer, that you'll continue to ask yourself, continue to search out. These passages, God stuck them in there. They're kind of like the one that they made the big splash here a while back about when you're going through all the names of the begats and all that sort of thing. And then there's the one guy that pops up and it says, expand my borders and all this. There's everybody else is just a word, and then there's that one guy, and the whole world all of a sudden got a hold of it. It was a big thing. It was in the bookstores and the airports and everything for a while. But it kind of got overblown, but yet it's one of those, these are those kinds of things that you're reading through, and it's just the okay, yeah, and you come to these and go, wow, God, why did you stick that in there? And if you thought that one was weird, next time we got two, we'll try to cover them both. We're going to have poison in the pot and the 20 loaves of barley.
Ron, could I share something?
Yeah.
Real fast. As you see the example that the Shunammite woman was, and then in Romans 8, we just looked at this with my high school Sunday school class last week. Most kids are gone, so we're here today. But in Romans 8, 26 and 27, it says, in the same way the Spirit also helps our weakness, for we do not know how to pray as we should, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And He who searches the hearts knows what the mind of the Spirit is, because He intercedes, and here's what's important, for the saints according to the will of God. And so it's about getting our prayers to line up with the will of God and saying, like Jesus said, not my will, but yours be done. And it was powerful.
Yeah. And that's really kind of what has to be going on. It's hinted at. It's not as direct as that passage. But
Maybe like Abraham had said with Isaac, that he figured that God made a promise, and so He would raise Isaac from the dead. And so this woman, she had been promised the son, and she's going,
it's a promise, surely.
Yeah.
Surely will fulfill that. That's just amazing. Huh? Thank you. Great passage. Very good. I've shot another morning for you this morning. Hope that you've got your list of questions you can work through. I didn't hit them all. I left a few out there to ponder over. But we'll pick it up next time. Hopefully get through this and kind of looking forward, kind of dreading getting further down the pipe when the prophets start kicking in. Because, man, this gets really, from a teaching standpoint, it gets really gnarly to figure out how to bring that all together, and how do you spend time going through Joel at the same time you're in Kings, and how do you pull in Isaiah when you're going through, so that'll get, I don't know how we're going to handle that. Maybe we'll get some bits and pieces. But this gets really interesting as you see, more than anything else, this nation has turned its back on God, and over and over and over and over again, God is telling them, here it is, come back. And I think He's making some of the same offers here. Let's close. Father, we thank You for our time together this morning, and for Your word that You've given us, for these frustratingly odd stories that pop up that we try to fit into the narrative of the history that You consider important for us to know and understand. We pray that You would give us insight, that You would continue to connect us with those who are a lot smarter than I am, that can help us to answer questions and see the ties and connections in these passages that illustrate Your Son and point us to Your salvation in Christ. We know that these things in the Old Testament, they point towards the Savior. He Himself said, those are the things that testify to Me. Help us to see them and to have a better appreciation for the Savior, for who He is, for the promises He fulfilled, and for the things that He offers to us. And help us to see our responsibility as believers to be about our Father's business, to be about looking out and continuing to bless the world outside of ourselves, that we were not created for the purpose of just being ourselves. We were created like the nation of Israel to be a blessing to others. And we pray that might be the case. Thank You for our time together this morning. In Jesus' name. Amen.